We are very fortunate to have Dr. Andrew Kiragu join us, and he's going to be talking, his talk is about talking to kids and parents about gun violence prevention. So Dr. Andrew Kiragu is currently the medical director of the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit at Hennepin Healthcare. Dr. Kiragu also provides pediatric critical care at Children's of Minnesota and Gillette Children's Hospital as an associate of the Children's Respiratory and Critical Care Specialist Group. Dr. Kiragu is a passionate advocate for children and is immediate past president of the Minnesota chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. He is an assistant professor of pediatrics at the University of Minnesota. And with that, we'll welcome Dr. Andrew Kiragu.
All right. So let me see if my graphics are going to work. Just an overlay of the troubles that we are facing. So I have no relevant financial disclosures, and I do not intend to discuss any unapproved commercial products. So talk a little bit about the epidemiology of firearm injuries on children, talk a little bit about anticipatory guidance, and also talk about our role as pediatricians in advocacy. So if you look at injury deaths across all age groups, and this is data from the CDC from 2017, you see that with regards to injuries, the vast majority are termed unintentional. About 20% are suicide, another 8% homicide, and then unknown, or it's not clear what happened, a smaller percentage. If you then dig down into, across all age groups, into unintentional injuries, you actually realize when people talk about our current opioid crisis, being a public health emergency, you can see how many people are dying from that number. Almost 30% of unintentional deaths are likely from opioids. But even more deaths than motor vehicle crashes are from firearms at 16%, and then you can see falls, suffocation. And these are across all age groups. In 2017, almost 40,000 people died from firearms. This is the highest number in almost 50 years, right? About 3,443 children died. So if you look at the average elementary or grade school classroom, about 20 kids, you can do the math. That's how many kids, how many classrooms of children died because of firearm violence. 115 of the pediatric deaths were unintentional. Some little kid found a gun that was loaded and unlocked and killed themselves or their sibling or a friend. 1,296 were suicides, 1,927 were homicides, and then something concerning, which I'll talk a little bit about later, 33 children were killed by police, and that was in 2017. So this is a problem. I mean, we are dealing with a significant problem. If you look at firearm deaths for children, the vast majority, 56%, of homicide, and we'll talk a bit about how this breaks out. About almost 40% are suicide, and then a smaller percentage, again, unintentional, undetermined, and then as you can see that a small group from legal intervention, which is the polite term to say that a policeman or woman killed you. This slide I bring up because this is something that we should all be concerned about. If you look at the top blue line, these are deaths per 100,000 children, okay? So that top line represents the rates of deaths from motor vehicle crashes, right? So look at the work that all the initiatives that we have put together have made, right? Wear seat belts, put an airbag in a vehicle, fix our roads, do better, okay? And look, we've dropped since 1999 to 2016 when this data was published, you can see a significant decline in those deaths. But look at the numbers. The next line is for firearm-related injuries. And those have stayed relatively stable. And you can see, unfortunately, from 2013, beginning to see an increase. If you look at all the other deaths, they've been essentially kind of remaining stable. But this slide it really caught my attention. Just the fact that where we've put efforts into reducing where we put efforts into reducing injuries, we've actually been able to make a significant impact. So I said I was going to talk a little bit about homicide and suicide. So if you look at homicides, this study by Fowler et al. Shows some of the disparities, right? So if you look at race and ethnicity with regards to homicides, unfortunately impacting youth of color much more than other youth. But if you look at suicide, it's flipped again. So all our children collectively are struggling and suffering from firearm-related injuries. All right. So I put this up there because this is part of who we are, right? As Americans, right? So firearms are part of the fabric of American life. So present in 18 to 64% of US households, depending on variability. People have looked at this. Are you more likely to have a firearm if you're white or black, if you live in the South or live in the Northeast or West? If you're a Republican or Democrat, are you much more likely to have a firearm? But on average, we have more guns in this country than we have people. So 393 million firearms in the United States. This is just an estimate because not everybody is going to say that they have guns. Because we have all these guns, it's important to look at how do parents think about the weapons in the house. So a lot of parents don't believe that their little kid knows where the weapons are, and they might even believe that, well, my kid has never handled a gun. I don't have a gun, but they don't know that their neighbor has a gun and their kid goes to visit their neighbor all the time and has handled a gun. So, a point as we begin to look at how we approach parents in our offices. And there's just a graphic showing that how the US far outstrips other countries with regards to ownership. So 120 guns per 100 people. So there are multiple reasons for gun ownership, right? So sport, people like to hunt. I mean, this is a tradition, a strong tradition. A lot of people buy guns to protect themselves. Some are just gun collectors, right? It was interesting. I once admitted a kid who had been shot with a musket. Now, I thought muskets were from, but Dad had lent his musket to a neighbor to go check it out. Neighbor brought back said musket still loaded. Dad threw said musket on bed. Said musket discharged and the projectile went through his wall, and kid was sitting, reading, doing his homework, minding his own business, and got shot. Now, fortunately, he didn't die, but I was like, oh my God, muskets. All right. But people own guns. Often, I want to protect myself, but for every self-defense or justifiable homicide, 43 individuals in the home die due to firearms, mostly due to suicide. I just want you to watch this video just to kind of understand, again, guns are part of our culture. This young lady is 13, was 13 at the time this video was being taken. She's a national champion marksman. As you can see, she knows how to safely store the gun. She knows how to unload, release from the chamber. Caitlin is her name. She's a national champion. She's now 20. And I mean, you'll find videos of 8-year-olds shooting AR-15s, which are the guns which were used to kill the kids in Newtown. So this is part of our culture, right? That young lady is probably going to become a policewoman one time, and it's okay that she's an expert markswoman, so we should not begrudge her that. As we should not begrudge all the parents and families that we see who have firearms in their home. So I wanted to look at the anticipatory, our well child visit, right? So you have 15, 20 minutes, and you're supposed to do an exam, answer the parents' questions, answer the kids' questions if they have any, and then you're supposed to tell them, have a little hundreds pieces of anticipatory guidance, write futures, the information that you're supposed to discuss with them, right? And then your chief is knocking on your door and saying, your RVUs are a little on the lower side. You need to, pick it up. So there are many competing concerns, right? So a lot of parents have questions about child development, health-related issues. So there are a lot of different things that the parent wants to kind of talk about. And of course, some of that discussion will be guided by, first of all, what are the parents' interests in the topic that you're going to talk about, how well the thing that you're going to tell them to do, how effectively or how easily can it be delivered, and the importance of the problem. So, and again, costs, language, cultural barriers, and then time, right? Time is a premium. So part of the anticipatory guidance we're supposed to give focuses around injury prevention. And there are many things we do talk about, right? We'll talk about put sunscreen on, put your kid in a seatbelt, wear bike helmets. We as pediatricians have no problem talking about those things, and we do them oh yeah, summer's coming, make sure you put some sunscreen on. Oh no, you see, but talking about guns, that's a whole different ballgame, right? Because there's some concerns about, well, first of all, let me take by a show of hands, how many pediatricians, providers, guests in this room have firearms or have handled a firearm? It's okay, no judgment. Okay, so a fair number have handled a gun. But there are many who have not, right? So you are not familiar with, and you don't want to look stupid talking about guns, and the people who own guns will definitely catch you out if you don't know what the hell you're talking about. So you don't want to be, well, I don't want to go see that doctor. He doesn't know what he's talking about. So, and then of course, we live in a climate where firearms have been politicized. And it should not have been, but they are. And of course, there are in some situations concerned about legal ramifications, right? In Florida, as you guys know, there was Docs versus Glocks law. Fortunately, the courts overthrew most of the prohibitions on pediatricians actually even talking about guns. And there might be some misunderstanding here in the room or by pediatricians that, there is a Minnesota law about, talking about firearms, but that really limits more the Minnesota Department of Health or other government health officials limiting their ability to go and collect information on how many guns you have in your house and stuff like that. But that's not our interest. But surprisingly, a lot of parents are open to questions, right? And asking does save lives. And so figuring out what firearms are in the home, how the people are storing the weapons and ammunition, and then, of course, providing information. And we'll talk a little bit about legislation. So this, you can't really see this very well, but what I wanted to highlight with this slide is the fact that a group of parents were asked, has your healthcare provider ever talked to you about weapons or firearms? And only 17%, about 17, 18% of parents said yes, that their healthcare provider had actually talked to them about. But about 89% said when their pediatrician or healthcare provider talked to them, they actually listened to what they said. Again, another slide, essentially talking about, and this looked at depending on whether or not the parents owned a firearm or didn't own a firearm, and asking whether or not pediatricians should ask about the parents of firearms. Across both groups, 65%, and even the folks who own guns, more than half said it's okay for the pediatrician to ask. And then, should pediatricians advise them on safe ways? Almost 75% said yes, they should tell me. If a pediatrician asked me not to have a gun in my house, would I listen? Almost half, would think it over. Only 30% would follow the advice. 10% would just ignore the advice. And of course that varied. You can see the numbers for yourself, depending on whether or not, even the people who owned guns, almost half of them would still think it over. They might not follow your advice, but they'll at least think it over. And then you can see, interestingly, and this is where an opportunity for teaching, right? So has your child ever been taught what to do when she comes across a firearm, he or she comes across a firearm? The people who have guns, 63% said yes. Those who don't own guns, less than half. So you can imagine, yes, you don't own a gun, but you've never told your kid what to do in case they come across a gun. That's a problem and an opportunity for us as pediatricians. And again, openness to talking about advice that pediatricians are given. So it's wide open. Not enough of us are talking to families about firearms, but families are willing and open to listen. Now, some of our colleagues have mentioned that whenever they bring firearms up, a lot of times they get a little pushback. And I'll go over with you some resources as far as talking to folks. With regards to firearm, you want to approach different age groups of kids in the home differently, right? The parent of a toddler, you're going to talk about firearms in a different way than the parent of a teenager. Of course, firearm violence can disrupt normal childhood development. It goes without saying that death stops child development, right? We want to avoid that. Death, bad; life, good, right? So we want to, but when you look at how different age groups of children interact with firearms, it's different. And just talking to the kids themselves is not always enough. And you need parents to be responsible. And as you know, the early childhood, little toddler, just crawling around, learning, putting everything in their mouth. And you can imagine coming across a firearm. What's this? Putting it in their mouth. It's loaded, and they kill themselves. So they're even school age, and I apologize for that typographical error. School age children, a little bit more cognizant, but even then, telling your 6-year-old, "Oh, don't touch that." "Oh, mom said don't touch that." I'm gonna touch that. Adolescents, the same. I mean, you can't tell me what to do. There are all these things, or struggling with depression, or, there are all these different things that as pediatricians we have to kind of think about. So a good way to kind of think about how you do this guidance, right? So the so-called 5 L's when you ask, okay, is there a gun? If there's a gun in the home, is it locked? Okay, is it loaded? Are there little kids in the house, right? Because then you'll have to approach things differently. Is anyone in the house feeling low, right? Is someone in the home at risk for committing suicide with that weapon? And one of the things that a lot of pro-gun advocates who have politicized this issue said is, well, if someone is going to kill themselves, they're going to kill themselves anyway. But as Dr. Partain talked about, I think if someone wants to kill themselves, yes. But the number of kids that I have saved who've taken a drug overdose far exceeds the number, like by multiples, the number of kids I've seen who shot themselves. Because, and actually, most kids who try to commit suicide with pills, and maybe it was some impulse, later are so thankful that they didn't die, and you can work with them to help them. But there's finality with a firearm. And then, people in the home learn it, right? This is what you do when you find a weapon. This is how you are safe around weapons. So these are things that it is reasonable to talk to families about. And then, being injured, being victims of violence, these have a lot of impacts around mental health. They are the mental health implications of being victim of violence. There are, when you think about the kid who accidentally kills their sibling, what are the mental health implications for that child? And what does it mean for children who live in communities where they are facing violence all the time, right? So people don't talk about this as essentially an adverse childhood event. Do gun safety programs work? There are different gun safety programs that the NRA puts out, all this, which essentially are just say no campaigns. We know how well that works with drugs. Just say no it's not a recipe for success if it's not combined with additional education and parental involvement, and doing all we can to try and prevent injuries. So there are different ways of storing firearms. This is a firearm in a gun lock, with a gun lock, and then in a safe. There are different kinds of safes. There are some, people who will say, oh, I have this handgun for protection, telling me to put the ammunition in one spot and the gun in another spot. It's just going to, if a crook comes in my house, I can't get at it. Okay, so you can put it in this gun safe, which is biometric, so that, you can use your fingerprint or whatever to get at it, but then your little toddler is not going to be able to open that. And then, of course, for those who are real gun aficionados, there is the Bighorn gun safe. And I've put some handouts, by the way, on each table. They're not enough, but I'll give you a resource page which you can, and a lot of those handouts you can get from on those web pages. But one of the handouts talks about where to buy gun safes, the cost, and it can be from tens of dollars to $1,400 for the Bighorn. But all these are ways to keep weapons secured so that people are not going to harm themselves. So then there's the other anticipatory guidance, right? So I bring up these pictures of young black men, okay, young black children. So, and this the interactions, we talked about young young children of color being killed by police. And this didn't just start, right? Now we are in the age of YouTube and Facebook and Facebook Live, so we can see this. But the picture up top, Emmett Till, 14-year-old. Some person said, oh, he whistled at this white woman, so cops and some other people killed this 14-year-old boy. Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, 12 years old. Cops shot him. He was playing with a gun in a park. Cops arrived and shot him in 2 seconds after they arrived. Okay, so really? 2 seconds? They don't even time to say, stop, police. No, there was no stop, police. They just shot him. And there's video. Ferguson, this young man, Mike Brown from Ferguson, and then Jordan Edwards, a young man who was killed in Texas. He was at a party with his brother and some friends, and it started getting rowdy, so they said we should leave. And they were leaving, and a cop shot with a rifle at the car that was leaving and killed him. Then the cop said, the chief of police at that city said, oh, the car was reversing towards them in an aggressive manner, so the cop felt he had to shoot to protect himself. Later turned out he lied. The cop, fortunately, was indicted for murder. But I bring this up because when you're doing anticipatory guidance for young children of color, there's the other part that the other concerns that parents and the kids may be dealing with. And some of that has to do with if they're living in communities where they're at high risk, more likely to be carrying weapons, more worried about what the interactions are going to be, there may be a little additional support you might need to give to their parents. You'll hear a lot of black parents talking about the talk they have with their sons about how to interact with the police in order to get home safe. And we're talking about sometimes, I don't know if you guys remember, there was a video that came, a situation that came a few years ago where there was this very big autistic kid that had ran out, and he was playing with a toy in the middle of the street, and his counselor from his group home ran to try and get him out from the street, and there were cops there, and he didn't want them to shoot this autistic kid who was holding an object, but it was a toy. And so he announced who he was, he followed all the rules. He said, please, this is an autistic kid, don't do anything. Put your hands up. He put his hands up. He had his hands up, and a cop shot him. And he asked the cop, why did you shoot me? And the cop said, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know why you shot me? I mean, so even in those situations. And then, of course, all the autistic kids that we work with who may not have a way, of expressing themselves in a situation where they are stressed, they may make sudden movements that make a cop nervous. I mean, all these are things that you want to think about when you're doing anticipatory guidance. Advocacy. So you remember this tweet from the NRA telling docs to stay in their lane? Yeah, we stayed in our lane, all right. Yeah, so, and this was a response. This was Dr. Melnick wrote, this isn't my lane. So, and there is a role, right? These are some of the pictures that got sent, people tweeted saying, no, this is our lane. We're the ones taking care of children and victims of firearm-related violence or injury. So this is something for us. We have a role. Okay, I don't know how I'm doing for time, but I just wanted to say, these are some of the resources. The first web page is actually really cool. Firearmsafety.org. It's a UMichigan site. And there they actually have videos of how to talk to parents. They actually have simulated videos of how to talk to parents about guns. They actually have videos on guns and different parts of guns. This is the stock, this is the barrel, this is the trigger, this is the, breaking it down so that if you're not familiar with what these things are, then it's easy, it gives you some more comfort. And then one of the things I printed out was one of the resources that they give for parents. Massachusetts Medical Association also has some information, as does AAP, so a lot of different resources. The strategies for youth, again, ways in which you can be able to, different programs that show how you can counsel around young people of color. And then there was this PBS, kind of talk, 10 rules to survive if stopped by the police. All right, so I'll end with this video. This is from Mom's Demand Action.
We each come from different walks of life.
I'm the retired police chief of the St. Louis Police Department.
Soy consejera bilingüe. I do a lot of writing. I write a lot of poetry.
So I've known since I was very young that I wanted to be a pediatrician.
I'm a dad, and I love to study history. And firearms are a way for me to access that history.
Soy madre, soy esposa,
I'm a dad, I'm a husband.
I'm a mother, an advocate.
and I'm a proud military wife and mother.
As parents, we all agree
That raising happy, healthy children es lo más importante para todos nosotros.
And right now, we're dealing with a major national public health issue.
My son was at his uncle's house playing with his 13-year-old cousin when his 13-year-old cousin found a gun that was unsecured in a drawer, not realizing that one of the bullets was still in the chamber. So when Jawan told him to put the gun away, he said, "Look, it's not loaded," and pulled the trigger. In approximately 17 minutes, my son was gone.
So many of these deaths are unintentional. And when that happens to everybody involved, it's devastating.
anytime a young person dies, you think to yourself, this is something that could have been prevented.
I don't think I ever thought I would see a child with a gunshot injury. I guess we have all seen them, unfortunately.
He was bald. When I look in the back seat now, it's empty, and that's what I'm used to seeing. I'm used to seeing him.
Nearly 1,500 American children are killed by guns every year.
The leading cause of death for children in America.
As adults, we're responsible for our children, and there are 5 simple things we can do
To keep them healthy.
Secure and store your guns locked and unloaded and separate from ammunition.
Most guns used in school shootings come from the home.
Practica comportamiento responsable.
Talk to your kids about gun safety, but remember, that's a precaution, not a guarantee.
Ask family members and other parents if there are any unsecured guns in their homes,
Es tan fácil como mandar un texto o correo electrónico.
and it could save a life.
Recognize the role of guns in suicide.
If you think your kid is at risk, make sure all your guns are stored. Or just get them out of the house.
Tell as many people as you can to be smart.
So to recap, secure, model, ask, recognize, and tell as many people as you can. Be smart.
Necesitamos hacer mejor.
I store my guns responsibly. I ask my neighbors and my friends to do the same thing.
Whether or not it's your gun, it could be your child.
Es responsabilidad de todos.
We can't afford to stay silent.
So you all have the power to continue to save lives by remembering that you can be smart.
And that's the website. All right. Any questions?
Andrew, do you know what the gun safety course age is? There's a gun safety course in Wisconsin and Minnesota that I advocate for all patients who are hunting families or whatever, and I never can remember if it's 11, 12.
I think it might be, I'm not sure, I don't want to lie, but I think you have to be over 10 for sure. Yeah. And it might be closer to 12, but I'm not 100% sure. Does anyone know? 12? 11 and older, okay.
11. Just one way that I will advocate when I hear about a gun, just say, hey, make sure you get signed up for that, you know, check the gun safety class, and at least it brings up a idea about it in there.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you. I thank you for your attention. Thank you for your advocacy on behalf of children. And remember to ask about firearm safety. Okay, thank you. God bless you all. Cheers.